Welcome to the bonus show. That special relationship between the US and the UK now has new individuals, as Liz Truss is officially the UK's prime minister after she met with the Queen and received the blessing, and very, very quickly dealing with a number of major issues is Liz Truss. Truss has refused to spell out her energy strategy during her campaign to replace Boris Johnson, as NPR writes. And now, all of a sudden, she has explained what it is going to be, and it will be a cap on energy bills at a cost to taxpayers of about £100 billion, including a number of other elements as well. And there are some who like this and some who don't like it. She is a member of the Conservative Party, the Tory party. There was a funny moment today, I must have been earlier today, where Theresa May in the House, is it the House of Lords or the House of Commons? I always forget what it's called.
Well, there's two.
There's both.
The House of Lords is more equivalent to our Senate, but they don't have that much power. I think it's more ceremonial, procedural. The House of Commons is more like our House of Representatives, but they seem to have the real power.
Yes, that's where all of the banter takes place.
Yes.
Yeah. In the House of Commons, Theresa May, the former prime minister, asked the question, why have all three women prime ministers been from the Conservative Party? To rousing applause. And Liz Truss, I don't even know what she said. It was, one of these moments that's just kind of a funny moment. But the point here is, yes, another conservative woman as British prime minister. And, in the United States, there's this idea that some believe that when we do get our first female president, it will be a Republican woman rather than a Democratic woman. And there have been talks of Condi Rice and others. I don't know. It's a predictive question. We don't know what the answer is going to be. But in the UK, it certainly has worked out that well, and a new prime minister now.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, the Democratic Party is the only party to have, the only major party to put forward a woman nominee, and that was Hillary Clinton.
Yep.
And also it's the Democratic Party that got us our first female vice president in Kamala Harris. Although Republicans have tried, of course, with Sarah Palin, and Democrats tried before that, going back many years. So we've had some attempts to try to get women in the highest seat of office in our country. It just hasn't happened yet, but it will soon. And who knows, it could be a Republican woman. But yeah, Liz Truss, I don't envy her position right now, because certainly at any time in history, there's going to be challenges that a new leader has to take on. But with everything going on right now, with the energy crisis, the Russian war in Ukraine, with inflation, all these different problems, like that's a tough position to try to become a new leader and try to be popular in that type of environment.
I don't think that, there was this idea, which I think was true, that during part of the Trump administration, the relationship with the UK, considered the special relationship, had been damaged to some degree. I think that it was very quickly repaired when Joe Biden became president. And I don't really think that there is significant substantive concern about the Biden-Truss relationship, really. I mean, yes, Biden's a Democrat and Truss is a conservative, and that's been a contrast at many prior times as well between the U.S. and the U.K. leaders. But I don't think it's an endangered or problematic relationship at this point in any way.
No, it'll probably be pretty similar to the relationship between Biden and Boris Johnson. It is interesting, though, how the relationship between the U.S. leader and the U.K. leader was fractured during the era of Trump, because I believe it was David Cameron and then Theresa May and then Boris Johnson who were the prime ministers, respectively, during the time when Trump was president, all three being conservative. And yet there was still sort of a divide between the two countries because Trump was just so out there and, so out of place on the world stage.
No doubt whatsoever. So I think it will be interesting to see. In terms of Ukraine, Russia, there are sort of some decisions to make. The energy policy has been a controversial thing. The UK's role in the EU remains as an issue. And so there are lots of things here. And I agree with Pat. It's not a particularly enviable time for Liz Truss to be the prime minister, but I'm interested to see where it goes. And we're going to follow it, of course.
Yeah, and we'll have to see how the public responds to her, because All Truss had to do was become the leader of the Conservative Party, which she did by getting the majority of the party's 172,000 dues-paying members to vote for her.
Yep.
There's not going to be a general election needed in the UK until 2024, meaning that the general public has, by and large, not voted her in office. Like, it's only 0.05% of British adults who have selected her to be the prime minister. But having that position alone, the power of incumbency, that'll probably propel her to being able to solidify support among a good amount of people.
A New Mexico official has been ousted for participating in the January 6th insurrection attempt. This is Cowboys for Trump founder. I believe the pronunciation of the first name is Coy. It's Couy. Coy?
I think it is Coy.
Coy. I think it's Coy Griffin. He was also serving as the Otero County Commissioner and has been removed from office and barred from future office for his role in the Capitol attack. This is an order from a judge who says this guy must be immediately removed and can never be allowed to participate in office again. This is under the 14th Amendment disqualification. He engaged in an insurrection after taking an oath. Now, what is fascinating about this, Pat, is that one of the main defenses from Republicans has been, come on, guys, it's a bit much to call it an insurrection attempt. Most of the people there were just protesting that they felt there were irregularities. To say it was insurrectious, you sort of need to get into someone's mind and be able to prove what their intentions were. And by the way, they didn't really come close. Most of them didn't even have guns. Sometimes they like to say they weren't even armed. Nobody was even armed. We now actually have a judicial decision that has accepted that this was an insurrection attempt, and on that basis has disqualified someone from holding office in the future. I don't know that this can really be precedent in other cases, but we now have a judicial decision that it was indeed an insurrection.
Yeah, and from day one, I thought that it was an insurrection despite the right's pushback. And it's not only because they took over the Capitol building or center of government here in the U.S., it's also that they did try to overthrow a democratic election in our country. And so that, to me, fits the bill. So, yeah, this is actually the first time since 1869 when a judge has used the Constitution's insurrection-related disqualification language to oust someone from office. And the first time that a court has ruled that this specifically was an insurrection. So I wonder what kind of precedent it will set.
Right.
We've already had these sort of trials with Marjorie Taylor Greene and Madison Cawthorn to see if they were going to be disqualified from holding office. Yet they were not protesters, rioters who were taking part specifically in the insurrection. They were more inspiring it, speaking it before it, and that sort of thing. So I can understand how they were able to be given a pass. But with someone like Coy Griffin, who is in the middle of it all, I can see how he would be disqualified based on this provision.
So what did Coy Griffin actually do? So there are there's two categories of things that he did. One is rhetorical and the other is sort of like physical, I guess we would say. First of all, he was inflaming and mobilizing others, encouraging them to come to D.C. on January 6th, calling it a war, indicating that they need people to go with the firearms and ammunition that he brought to the Capitol. So that was the rhetorical side. He also is on video scaling the Capitol walls and using a bullhorn to lead a group in prayer, giving a speech promoting the attack and calling it a great day for America, celebrating the violence after the insurrection. So there's a very long list of things where he was not just an idea guy, I think is fair to say.
Yeah, if you're going to pick anyone to disqualify from office based on this statute,
it would be this
it's going
guy.
to be Coy Griffin.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me like you think it's okay for the judge to do this based on the law. There's precedent, even though it goes back a long time to do this. But politically, do you think this is the right move? I mean, it's not really a political decision necessarily, but do you think Democrats would be wise to try to use this to oust other Republicans from office, to say you're disqualified from running from office again because of this provision, and we have someone who's already been kicked out because of it? I just get the sense that maybe it will look like we can't beat them at the ballot box, and so this is the only way to try to get them out.
I don't know that it's going to be a choice Democrats have to make, to be totally honest, because This was a state level decision. And I understand that the House of Representatives has investigative powers, but it seems to be a stretch to me that they could make such a declaration to oust anyone from the House. And if it's people outside of the House, state level officials or whatever, it doesn't really have anything to do with Democrats. So I get the question. I just don't think it's really up to Democrats.
Yeah, I just don't think it's going to go that far,
No.
especially with like more nationally prominent politicians, because again, they weren't actually in the riots; they were more inspiring it. So I just
Correct.
don't think it's going to reach that point. But we can tell that the right is going to use that kind of language. So like, oh, they can't beat us fair and squarely at the ballot box, and so therefore they're trying to disqualify our candidates from running for office. Same thing they're trying to do with President Trump, for example.
Right. No doubt about it. So we're going to follow it and see if this rationale is applied elsewhere. So far, one decision that makes a lot of sense to me based on the facts, that's for sure. When I announced to you with peace and love Joe Biden's plan to forgive some student loan debt, I also told you, of course, Republicans are going to try to find a way to stop this. They will either say Biden doesn't have the authority, they'll come up with something. And that is now happening. Senator Ted Cruz, a Republican who represents Texas in the United States Senate, has started to try to block student loan forgiveness. And Cruz and a number of other Republicans are trying to figure out, well, what legal options do we have to block the student loan forgiveness before it takes effect? They have a number of different ideas in mind. They're looking at lawsuit possibilities. They are trying to figure out who would be the right clients. Remember that when it comes to using lawsuits to stop a law from going forward, there are questions of standing. There are questions of jurisdiction. Who can bring a lawsuit in order to stop student loan debt forgiveness? It's a real question mark. And Cruz even said on his podcast that he doesn't know who has legal standing, and that conservatives would love to say the average taxpayer has standing by saying, well, if I'm a taxpayer and I don't have anything to do with student loans directly, if my money is being used to forgive someone else's student loan debt, I should be able to sue. But Cruz acknowledges that it's unlikely a court would allow that. So maybe you could find someone who made $126,000 and would just miss out on qualifying and could somehow argue that they are uniquely damaged. They don't even claim to know at this point, Pat. So I don't know how much we need to think about it, but we knew they were going to try to come up with a way to stop this.
Right. It's going to be difficult, I think, to find someone who has standing to put this lawsuit forward, because you could sort of apply these arguments to other issues. Like if a taxpayer is upset that maybe they have to pay another $1,000, $2,000 in taxes to pay for this. Well, you could make the same case when it comes to wars that we fight overseas. True. Or tax cuts that favor the wealthy and stick the working class, middle class person with the bill. You could also make the case that, okay, well, if you have someone who makes $126,000 a year and they're going to be the plaintiff, well, there's plenty of other things that are need-based, income-based in our society that we have benefits for. Like, if you make a certain amount of money, you don't have to pay like the Social Security tax, for example, that gets capped at a certain level. So are people making under that amount going to be able to sue because they have to pay when other people don't? Like, it's just one of those things where like you wouldn't apply this to other issues. And so I don't think you're going to be able to make the standing argument very well. And I just don't think that Ted Cruz would be politically wise to do this, because his constituents, plenty of people on the right, are going to benefit off of this too. And once the debt actually does get relieved, once people actually do get $10,000, $20,000 wiped off of the amount of money that they have to pay, are they really going to want to see that money come back on their balance sheet? Probably not. They're probably going to be upset to see that. And the fact that Ted Cruz and the Republicans did that to them, they're not going to reward them.
I tend to agree with you on that. And then just to be thorough, Ted Cruz also says the plan is illegal in the sense that Biden doesn't have the authority to cancel student debt. So they're not ignoring that path, but they're exploring a number of different paths in addition to that. Ted Cruz's calculation is that it will cost $2,100 per taxpayer to do what Joe Biden wants to do. And that is the origin of the slacker barista memes that have been floating around. And I don't know that we even want to get into that necessarily, but there's this whole thing where like they want to try to be careful not to insult anyone. But when you talk about slacker baristas who wasted time in college and now get student loan debt relief, I can't imagine that that's going to help them win any votes.
Well, it's also a contradiction, right? Because you can claim that someone just chilling on the couch all day without a job is a slacker, sure, but someone who is working a job at Starbucks as a barista, well,
right.
they're working. So how are they a slacker? They're doing their best. So yeah, that criticism that Ted Cruz made about the slacker barista didn't really make a lot of sense.
No, it seems misplaced. It seems like a misfire, I think I would say. And he's had to back off of it and sort of say, oh, well, we value everyone. It's not that baristas are bad. Many baristas are good or whatever. Just unforced errors. But just because 60% of the country likes the student loan debt forgiveness, or 65, I don't remember what the number was, 57, 67, something like that. The 35% that dislike it can be very powerful, and they can vote and they can make their voices heard. So we shouldn't write off the fact that they can probably mobilize a constituency around opposition to this if they want to.
Right. And Republicans are able to win elections without having more than 50% of the vote.
Yeah.
So they could be able to be effective with this. It's just like, even the people who don't personally benefit off of it, don't you think that they'll come across like someone in their family or a friend who is able to and feel a little bit of sympathy and say, oh, actually, this probably was the right thing? Or maybe it'll just blow over by the time the election comes around and it won't be so much of a voting issue for people who are against this. That's my thought anyway.
I tend to agree with you, but the proof will be in the election results in 7.5 weeks, I guess, at this point, which is wild. All right, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow. New show, new bonus show.